that the status quo is no longer acceptable. This is the big one. I want folks to really understand that this is a categorically new way of work, and folks need to start working on it right now.
Hello and welcome back to the Retail Podcast. Now, this conversation is due to a conversation with Jason, who's the current president of the Mac Alliance, about influential people in this world of AI. Now, Kelly, who you're going to meet in 1 second, who you can see, is doing my research, is probably one of the most influential voices in modern commerce architecture. And across his roles at Oracle, ATG, commercetools, and now the next generation of AI-driven commerce innovation, he's probably shaped how global AI leaders think about this new world. Kelly, have I missed anything?
I mean, when you lay it out like that, I mean, what are you supposed to say?
Yeah, well, listen, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I really do think it's a pleasure and a delight to take a deep dive. Before we get started, what do you, when you do these types of podcasts, I know you're going to say, well, what does your community audience want? But what do you traditionally want to get across? What would you like the listener to leave this show understanding?
That the status quo is no longer acceptable. I think so many folks think that they can just put a little Clippy type assistant on their website and call it a day. And this is the big one. This is the big one. Now it's going to take years and years, but there's already a very stark divide in the labor industry between people who are AI native and can use AI to its fullest extent versus those who don't. And I want folks to really understand that this is not just a smarter Google. This is not just a way to autocomplete some code. This is a categorically new way of work. And folks need to start working on it right now.
And do you think, because obviously through your extensive experience, you've seen the monolith era, you've seen the headless era, and now it's like the composable Mac era. Are these a natural progression from each one? So if I have been going up, I'm a retailer and I've gone through this process, am I going to have to reinvent my stack? Am I going to have to like start from scratch? How much of a connection is there between these transitions and where the world is going now from a technology perspective?
I mean, you have to go back and look at computer science as a new industry, as a new field of study. It's relatively brand new. I mean, it's really only been since the 60s, maybe, and really started to take off in the 90s and 2000s. If you look at computer science versus any other established field, whether it's archaeology or medicine or law or take your pick, they've had decades and decades and decades to come up with best practices, right? If an engineer needs to go build a bridge, they know how to do that. That's a well-established task at this point. And there's not a lot of innovation around the edge. And software is unique in that the entire foundation is all bits and bytes. You can rip it out and rebuild it. And over time, the technology has improved dramatically, right? Do you remember Bill Gates famously saying 64 kilobytes ought to be enough for anyone? And now in your phone, right, we practically have a terabyte of storage. So it's matured. And historically, back in the 90s, it made a lot of sense to have monolithic applications because the complexity was on the inside and networking was really slow and really painful. So there was no means of like exposing little bits of functionality up to the world because you just couldn't call a function remotely. It didn't work. So that incentivized everyone to build big applications that did a little bit of everything. And then we saw the rise of Headless. My boss at commercetools, founder CEO Dirk Horig, invented Headless in the mid 2000s, changed the industry. And Headless was pretty revolutionary in that the web's head was decoupled from the back end. And when I first started building, large scale e-commerce websites, it was pretty crazy because you'd literally embed business logic right in the UI, right in your JSP file, you would have business logic. And now the thought of that is just, makes your skin crawl, right? Because you would just never do that anymore. So Headless was a big innovation. And then on top of that, microservices. And microservices is another iteration of Headless. It's a further iteration. With Headless, you can have a monolithic backend or microservices microservices backend. Microservices are the better way to do headless because now you have little applications that each own their own domain, their own data, their own everything. So you can just update your shopping cart API with its own application, or just your promotions API or your pricing. You can go in and make granular changes to business logic and functionality without redeploying the whole application. And now with AI, it's even better. It's almost like the headless we always wanted, because now you just expose up your data and functionality via model context protocol, which then calls the APIs. And now AI is the giant head, it's the orchestrator, it's the everything, and it just magically knows how to call the APIs. So feels like we're evolving towards something a little bit more stable. Although who knows, maybe 20 years from now the kids will be talking about how antiquated Mach was back in the day. But still, this feels pretty cutting edge. We've got the tech to support it. You can make remote calls on a heartbeat. Everyone's exposing MCP now, or everybody should be. And with AI, MCP pairs really, really nicely with it.
I'm hoping this isn't being too topical, but I'd love your view, just your personal view on MCP. Sorry, in terms of UCP, the Universal Commerce Protocol that Google has released. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. Do you think it's something, because like Amazon was out, but now it's in, and a few of the major platforms are going down that route? I'm just curious on your thoughts on it.
Well, if we want to go back to, what is it, November of last year, Stripe teamed up with OpenAI and came up with agentic commerce protocol.
Yeah.
And they did so with, as far as I can tell, no participation from industry whatsoever.
Right.
Their attitude is like, hey, we're OpenAI, we're just going to do it. And clearly their lack of inexperience in the industry caused ACP to be half-baked and not work terribly well. And just their attitude towards industry has been not very nice. They have not been very great to deal with as new monopolists. So, given that vacuum, general dissatisfaction with ACP, Google then came in and at NRF this year in January released UCP. And just as an example of the difference between these two organizations, it was rumored, I didn't even see it, but it was rumored that OpenAI had 2 attendees at NRF, which is the world's largest retail conference. Tens and tens of thousands of people, right? Everyone there. And they send 2 random people from OpenAI, apparently. And then you compare that to Google, and you've got Sundar, the CEO, on stage at doing a massive keynote to kick off the launch of UCP. And there must have been 200 people from Google there. That's the difference between these two organizations. Google cares. OpenAI clearly doesn't care. And you can talk to people with Google. Like, what a novel concept that you can actually find time and talk to people and talk about the protocol. Google's been trying commerce many different ways over the decades, some successful, some not, but they've been learning. And they have real, credible, serious people there who understand commerce. Now, there's still some gaps for sure, but UCP is a much, much, much better protocol than ACP. And it shows that they consulted with industry, and it shows that they at least halfway know what they're doing, which is great to see. But UCP also is much more widely supported now. They've been much more open. They donated it to a foundation, which has been great. Ties in with the merchant center. So if you're already a Google customer and you upload your product catalog for advertising purposes, you can now auto sell. It's also an extendable protocol. So Talon One, which was a promotions vendor, just recently sold to Adyen. They built a loyalty extension to UCP, and I would expect to see many more extensions over time, which is great. So I give credit to Google here for really knocking it out of the park with UCP, and I'm cheering them on to win this battle.
Now, one of the areas that I know we've obviously spoken before was around order management and how you're potentially looking at that whole back-end process system technologies to create a unified way. Can you just talk me through what are you actually practically looking at, and what are you putting together, or what has been put together?
Well, ACP and UCP are selling channel standards only. So they are just order capture, and they sit between the commerce platform, whatever that happens to be, often something like Shopify or commercetools. And then it sits between the payments vendor, so think Stripe or Adyen or somebody like that. And then finally it sits with the AI head. So think of your ChatGPT or your Google Gemini, something like that. And there's kind
Yeah.
of a triangle there between those three. And the ending goal of those two protocols is to get you to a thank you for your order page, right? That's what the goal of those is. Now, there's a lot more work, obviously, behind the scenes. And this is something I fault both for not really taking seriously, is you have to surface up inventory data and shipping data natively and quickly so that you are able to guarantee that the item is there sitting in a warehouse for fulfillment. And Alex, if you buy something, it says it's going to show up in your doorstep on Wednesday. Right. Great. That's what you need to sell something. Otherwise, you just have a product catalog, which doesn't really help anyone. So that's one thing. Those are two things. The other is once you capture an order, you have to do something with the order, right? The order has to go somewhere. And that can go right back down to fulfillment via an OMS. It can go through the commerce platform. So there's definitely a lot of areas of improvement there. We at Pipe 17, where I'm president, we surface up inventory in many cases directly from the 3PL. We do so authoritatively. We do
Yeah.
the same for shipping, and then we built a network so that you can pass orders to this network directly from ACP or UCP or via the commerce platform, and then go all the way back to the 3PL or WMS for fulfillment. So we get the order from the thank you for your order page all the
Yeah.
way to somebody's doorstep. Basically, it's the back half of ACP and UCP.
And where do you think so? Obviously, these are early days, and retailers are sort of grappling around with what to do. What do I invest in now that will be fruitful in 5 years from now? What's your view? Like, what's the direction of travel that you're seeing that the industry is going when it comes to this new world?
I'm seeing a lot of inertia, and the
But
inertia
like,
is
do nothing. Wait to see who's going to be the winner or leaders.
which is just waiting and waiting and kicking the can down the road and hoping that the next person in your seat has to deal with it and not you. Because look, you have to make some pretty substantial changes here, right? Like a lot of folks have legacy OMS going back 30 years. That doesn't work, clearly doesn't work very well. They've got homegrown commerce platforms or some other mess, that doesn't work very well. So if you're a VP of e-commerce at a brand, what your goal is to do as much work around the edges as possible without having to make any difficult changes.
Yeah.
So that's what leads to this Clippy phenomenon of, oh, we've got an assistant now. And then, what's even worse is people do A/B test on visits with and without the assistant. And they find, of course, that the assistant dramatically overconverts relative to your normal control group. And that's just because of selection bias. Because if somebody actually goes to your .com and is interested enough in buying something from you that they then go to your assistant and engage with an assistant, that's a much higher conversion intent just off the bat. So then that gets reported back to the board as, look, our AI work is actually paying off. Look at this. We got so much higher conversion rate. Isn't that awesome? And they're not. They're just not doing anything. So brands need to be doing a couple of things right now. They need to be enriching and cleaning up their product catalog data. That's a really, really big one. Product catalog data is a mess. Always has been, always will be. I sit on the board of Bluestone PIM, and that's their entire pitch is your product catalog data is a mess. Let us help you fix it. And I see it every single day of my life. It's an absolute mess. So first, people need to actually get it together. And with AI now, it's actually pretty easy to do. All of these PIMs have pretty advanced AI capabilities where you can just have it go through and clean up things. And you also need, you need to add yes, no flags that AI can understand your clothing and items better. So your shirt, for example, right? How many buttons, right? That should be a distinct field, right? And then button type, is bone equals true? Is bone equals false, right? Is plastic true, right? Color, stitching, thread color. I mean, there are 1,000 attributes on a shirt, and AI thrives on that because people want very specific items, right? Maybe they'll upload a photo of an existing shirt that they like, and your AI assistant will then distill that down to its component parts and look for, 50 different search criteria when it's searching the wide world of shirts, and it come back with a shirt exactly like yours, but a different brand, right? Like that's what people want these days. They don't just want another button-up shirt with 5 attributes. It doesn't work very well. So that's one thing. Second thing is they have to publish their data or syndicate their data out to the AI heads, and you can go directly to ACP or UCP. And that's a big important step. You also have to focus on AEO or GEO. So making sure that you are publishing a lot of original content out there on your own domains, but also on third parties. It's ratings and reviews, it's Reddit, it's X, it's all over the place, so that the LLMs can suck all that data in and return better products when necessary. You also have to invest in up-to-date order management, right? So selfishly, you need something much more modern to deal with AI, because I think we're going to see not just two heads with OpenAI and Gemini and maybe Claude. I think AI is going to give rise to 1,000 different heads, where you're going to have, video game developers, and you're going to have some 16-year-old kid who builds a hit video game, and he's going to try to monetize that game through in-app commerce. And you're going to see that rise, just like we saw Minecraft.
It's already, yeah. I mean, for me in Roblox, for any parent, they know that Roblox is the conduit into so much, such a large ecosystem that is trying to transact, that is trying to bring you on a consumer journey rather than a video game journey. And it's in its infancy.
So look, there's a lot that has to happen between now and then. But right now, at a very minimum, cleaning data and publishing it up. Those are the top two, just to get ready. The other thing is, it's a people issue. And a lot of folks out there are just not using AI in their day-to-day life. Maybe they're using it as a better Google assistant, but there are a lot of ways, and I write about them on LinkedIn all the time, that you can do categorically different, better work. Right? It's an entirely different work style with AI versus not. And so many of these retailers are just doing, like a lot of retailers even block access to ChatGPT and Claude. Like they just block it internally. Like, are you supposed to run a business and block AI these days? But they do. It's because they're overzealous lawyers, and what about the security and right? And I think that's just so out of date now. And I think the AI native companies are going to run circles around those who are not.
Yeah, I've got two questions, and I'll let you decide in which order you answer them, because one of them sort of relates back to a couple of things you were saying down in a couple of minutes ago, and the other is just sort of thinking about this in the context of the business. So you spend your time podcasting on LinkedIn. You communicate a lot to the industry, and you have your own communities that you are actively participating in. What's the one thing that you find people mostly disagree with you on, if they do, in that perspective?
It's always the timing of these big shifts in the market. So I've been
expand that for me. You think it's going to happen sooner or later, or what's the thinking there?
Social media rewards certainty. I do not have certainty. Nobody does. Anybody claiming to have certainty is lying.
Yeah.
There are some people who say you have to do this right this very moment. There are others who say this is just a fad. It's going to pass. Give it 10 years before we start to see real improvement, and it's still not going to fundamentally change the market. And I could argue this entirely both different ways, right? And I do. Like, I argue I'll give you an example. Last week, I had to make some 1-800 calls for insurance, for my cell phone provider, airline. And I go through all the authentication process with all three of these providers. So you have to enter in your ID number and date of birth and PIN codes and everything else. And then in all three cases, you get to a human agent and they ask you what your name is.
Security purposes. You said I've said that 3 times, but
what are we doing here, guys? Right? And these are big household name companies. So, I think that, and this technology to be able to hand off an authenticated user has existed for decades. And I see big companies completely unable to actually implement any of this stuff whatsoever. On the other side, I look at my day job and I look around startup world where I live, and we're all in this very deep. Friend of mine just raised 25 million for his company Series A. And he said they're at 6 people, and they raised the money. And I said, well, what are you going to do hiring wise? And he said, we might add a 7th or 8th person. Right? But that's an example of where, startup world is very different. And in this world, we are killing it with AI, and it's dramatically improved our efficiency in our lives. But then it's going to take longer, and it depends on where you are in the organization and, what size of company you're at. Because if you are working at a 100,000 person, Fortune 10 company, you probably, don't really know what's happening with AI, and you're probably going to disagree with a lot of my posting because you think I'm nuts. If you're in the startup world, you're saying, well, yeah, of course, we've been doing this now for 2 months. Where have you been? Right? So it's a matter of where you are, and I get disagreements on both sides of that, of you're late or you're way too early. And
Okay.
I do get that a lot.
Interesting. I mean, personal antidote. I'm ex Verizon, ex Microsoft, and I can see in both of those roles that I've had in those companies over the last 13, 15 years, given the technology just today, without it going forward, I would probably have 5 or 6 agents working with me in my role to do what I'm doing, right? In my mental model for this is, if even if you're an enterprise now, you would benefit from 5 or 6 agents helping you. I've got about 10 doing this little business or agency, and that's helping me do all the bits. But when I think about my corporate career, I definitely think that the world has moved on. One thing that you mentioned, the second question that I want to ask is risk mitigation. I'm C-level, CIO, whatever, CXO. I have to protect myself, right? I'm petrified of getting fired, and I have to mitigate risk. And then everything you said about UCP, about people just sort of not doing anything and waiting for the next person to do so, it's probably because they don't want to take the risk. What are some of the ways I can mitigate risk from your perspective in going into this new world?
The whole framing is wrong that you just gave, which is, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, no, no. I
Here-
love it.
here-
I like it. Go.
Historically, you would have had to have spent a lot of money to go all in on a new trend.
Yeah.
Historically, you would have had to, and you'd go hire Accenture or Deloitte, or pick your big GSI, and it would cost millions of dollars, and it would be a 6-month project, 12-month project, big presentation, perfectly pressed pants, the whole thing, right? That's historically how it was done. And
Yeah.
in that framing, it is risky if you go forward with something and it doesn't work out because you've invested a lot and then you lose a lot of money. Now you can get a random developer sitting in Dayton, Ohio. Sorry, I don't mean to pick on Ohio, but take your random corporate developer and say, go build me a UCP extension. Go do it. And you can go pull up Claude code for $20 a month and build it. And your investment of time is basically zero.
Yeah.
But people don't think that way. People think in terms of big projects that have to be managed and funded, and you need McKinsey to tell you that it was a good idea, and what we do in startup world, and the way to do it natively with AI, is before you even have a discussion, just shut up and go build it. Just build
Yeah.
it, because again, like I'm building, like I built myself an Onyx to UCP bridge on my own, and it works. I shouldn't be doing that, but it was so easy to do, and AI makes this all so perfect and simple. Yes, there are complications for sure, but your investment is an order of magnitude lower. It's one person's time for an afternoon to go prototype and build something. That's what you need to be doing on a regular basis. And people just don't think that way. It's an old corporate mindset of, we got to do this the right way, big projects, big teams. The right way to do it is, let's spend an afternoon on it, prototype it, let's see it. And then if that works, like, yeah, maybe then we spend a little bit more time productizing it. But until then, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to do anything.
Yeah, I got you. Agile plus, work in small pods, go fast, iterate. It's the hyper speed of the old way of iterate technology innovation, and how you sort of iterate your way. Okay, makes sense to me. What's the one question I should have asked you that I didn't?
That's a really good question. I guess what people individually, yeah, I guess what individuals can do now to upskill themselves with AI. So at
Okay,
a
love
personal level, how do you do it?
it.
And what I've been doing is, I've got a cheap LaserJet printer, and I print off documentation for Claude and for others, and I will just take that and sit by the lake and read. That's what you have to do. And then I'll go play. And I spend a lot of Saturdays just learning and doing. But you have to do it, right? That's the key, is you have to actually do it. And what's great about AI is, if you get stuck, you ask your Claude, hey, what am I doing wrong here? And it'll tell you.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, how cool is that? But people just aren't like really opposed to learning new things, especially people who are further along in their careers and who are used to doing things a very specific way, get very stuck, and they just are very dismissive of this type of iteration and learning. But you got to put in the time and work and do it and play with it. Nobody's going to teach you how to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lifetime, and a lot of what you've said resonates to me. But because I've been out of corporate for such a long time, I'm maybe buying into what CEOs or execs say on conference stages, where they all understand sort of like the Amazon playbook of fail forward, experiment fast. But listening to you, it feels like those days that I thought I'd learned are still, are still living. They haven't really disappeared. And there are a lot of companies who are still scared of change or taking a risk in this world, which is a shame. But again, maybe that's what separates the people who will win and the people who will lose in the AI generation. Okay, listen, Kelly, believe it or not, we've almost been talking for 30 minutes, which is double my normal show length. So I don't know what that's going to do to the algorithm. But it was a conversation that I love and I can continue having. So thank you so much. And maybe I'll ask you now, you'll be open to coming back in 3 to 6 months and we can have this conversation again.
Sure.
Seeing where we are, because I absolutely love it.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kelly.